Are we cooked? Is it possible to be insecure in today's world?
I won't say we're cooked, but I mean, it is a tough spot to be in. I mean, you always have to assume that at some point being hacked or being, digitally broken into is an inevitable thing that's going to happen to you.
United Way Suncoast is dedicated to creating a better tomorrow for communities of Tampa Bay by investing in services and programs that help people live the lives they imagine for themselves. They believe the best way to help their neighbors is to join them in the neighborhood, which is why their week of caring never fails to inspire. Join the United Way the week of April 27th as they again celebrate the collective efforts of nonprofits and volunteers working to strengthen the community. Learn more by visiting volunteersuncoast.org/week of caring. And remember, united we rise, united we win.
Welcome to Money Market, a Bank of Tampa podcast. We highlight the businesses, expert business advice, the local economy, and points of interest in the Tampa Bay market. Follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And make sure you share this episode with a friend or colleague. I am your host, Owen LaFave, the Pinellas County Market President for the Bank of Tampa, Tampa Bay's oldest and largest community bank. Today's guest is Gary Brickhouse, the Information and Security Officer at Guidepoint Security, where he is responsible for all aspects of the company's information security program, inclusive of building and maintaining Guidepoint's internal security architecture and its control practices. Gary had critical stops and positions at Disney and Publix along his professional journey, and we're lucky to have him here speaking to us about cybersecurity, which everybody needs to be informed about. So, Gary, welcome to Money Market.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. Glad to be here.
I'm not even sure where to start with this one, but maybe something topical. And I know you're not a defense contractor, in full disclosure. But like when I see that the U.S. Treasury Department was compromised, when I see that Verizon was compromised during the campaign election, when Homeland Security is issuing notices about the cranes at the ports being compromised by potentially by Chinese chips and are subject to potential takeover. I mean, are we cooked? Is it possible to be insecure in today's world?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, and really, it's,
to
be honest, yeah, right. To be honest with you, I think it's why I have job security for the foreseeable future. Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about cybersecurity, a lot of what you just mentioned really is tied to what we would consider like nation state actors. Mm-hmm. So you think about countries who are trying to, make advances, whether it be to steal information or to disrupt, right, is a big thing. And I think that from our perspective, as a just, Joe somebody sitting at home, right, there's not a lot that you can do about that. You're sort of trusting the government, you're trusting cybersecurity experts within those organizations to make sure they have the right defenses and they're doing the right things. But the saying in our industry is the bad guys, they get to try all day long and they only have to be right once.
Right. Yeah.
And that makes it really hard. And so I think part of the strategy from a defense perspective is, how do you do things, what we call defense in depth, right? We want to build layers. And so when you think about critical infrastructure, when you think about the U.S. Treasury, for instance, I mean, they have a lot of checks and balances in there and controls in place to help protect us. To answer your question, though, are we cooked? I won't say we're cooked, but I mean, it is a tough spot to be in. I mean, you always have to assume that at some point being hacked or being, digitally broken into is an inevitable thing that's going to happen to you.
Okay. And I guess in today's kind of geopolitical sensitive climate, you talked about nation state actors. I mean, is that something that we're seeing more of? Is it more prevalent?
Sure. Nation state is always on the radar. They are able to, if you think about the economy of hacking, right? The economy of bad guys, the economy of threat actors is the term that we use. And then you have a nation state that can highly fund those. It's a pretty bad combination. And those nation state actors, there's no shortage of information that they want. There's no shortage of disruption that they would like to do. And so it really is always, I say a game of cat and mouse, right? But it isn't as much the chasing as much as it is the continued, I guess maybe the big bad wolf is probably a better example of, continuing to try and blow the house down.
Well, I mean, when you hear that the Treasury and Verizon,
Right.
was compromised, I just get concerned. What happens if we lose? Somebody hacks into a power grid and shuts a power grid down, and you've got millions of people without power for days as a result of some cyber attack. I mean,
Right.
it's terrifying.
So, it reminds me a couple of years ago, there was an issue, a cyber attack that impacted the oil pipeline. And I don't know if you remember, but it was so funny to me because when it happened, here we are in Lakeland, Florida. This pipeline issue was so far away from us, but it disrupted the fuel in Lakeland, Florida, Central Florida area. And all of a sudden, people couldn't get gas. And for people who weren't in tune, they had no idea. We're used to it when hurricanes come that you lose gas and everybody's lined up. But this was like on a random Tuesday or something, right? And no one could get gas, and no one knew why. And then you have people in the industry who are seeing the ripple down effect of, one, I won't say minor. I mean, it was a significant outage that occurred due to this attack. But you bring up a great point in the sense that, again, from Florida's perspective, we get to see what happens when a hurricane comes, and when resources are in short supply, people panic very quickly, right? They just do. And if you can't get gas or you can't get food, people get, I don't know what the metrics are, but you're probably a week out from, really panicking.
Right.
And so yeah, it's a real threat.
Well, we saw in COVID with toilet paper.
Right.
Nobody was running out of toilet paper, but there's a run.
And it's a tough topic to talk about because it feels a little doom and gloom. The reality is, I mean, I think those, when you think about critical infrastructure, is that a risk that could happen? Absolutely, right? At any point in time, those could be targets. Those are targets. Is that something that you should stay awake at night tonight about, like, and not get sleep? No, right? I mean, I think the government is aware of it. If you look at some of the efforts that the White House has done around trying to protect critical infrastructure, right? They've done some very specific actions to help enforce those controls, to push those down. So I feel like the government sees it, they're aware of it. I think in typical government fashion, might be a little slow to act, right? I mean, slow to materialize. Right. Yeah, but I think it's definitely on their radar.
But so, I mean, outside of the government, I mentioned Verizon.
Right.
And so you think Verizon, like one of the largest telecom companies in the world, and they can get compromised. I mean,
Sure.
what does that say about kind of the large enterprises and the ability for them to be compromised?
Yeah. So again, I mentioned earlier, it's typically not a matter of if and when. And when you're a company like a Verizon or an AT&T or any of these large organizations, your attack surface is what we refer to it as, is just so much larger. You think about your footprint in just such a big organization, and it really only takes, to get out of the cybersecurity world for a second, it only takes one unlocked door, right? It only takes one email to get sent, an email in like a phishing email or something that's sent to you that you accidentally click on, where a lot of the controls in a large organization might be completely bypassed. And at that point, attackers have a foothold, and now they're able to do, to sort of pivot through your organization potentially. But again, when you look at a company like Verizon or a company like that, they just have a lot of information, and
so is it just scale? I mean, they're almost too big.
Scale is an issue, right? It just a lot of land to protect, I guess, to use that phrase, to think about it in the context of land, a lot of area to protect. Again, we call it attack surface. there's just a lot of attack surface out there to manage.
It's great.
Now, I will say at the same time, though, those organizations comparatively have significantly higher information security budgets than other organizations, right?
Sure.
That they're specifically, working ridiculous amount of hours, right? They're spending a lot of time to try and create an environment that is defensible and protects that information like you would expect or want as a customer. You would want your information to be protected.
And I think most businesses are in the category, but there's a lot of businesses that cybersecurity is a little bit of an afterthought. It's a cost center and not a business enabler.
Right.
I mean, how do we increase the awareness that it's important?
Man. Yeah, it's such you really hit the nail on the head, Owen, because a lot of organizations, especially small to medium-sized businesses, they can only make and generate so much revenue. And if you're going to take a large chunk of that, unfortunately, cybersecurity is not cheap, right? Mm-hmm. It's not inexpensive between either the technical resources to do it, or the solutions that you need in your environment to help protect. Again, none of them are cheap. And so we see, especially across the small to medium-sized business market, that it's just hard to where we're going to prioritize those dollars and resources. And at the end of the day, if I can't make money doing the thing that I'm supposed to be doing, how can I invest over here?
Right.
But the problem is you have to. I mean, that's the thing. And what we're seeing more and more is now, other customers, other third parties are requiring that. So even a startup, for instance, we get phone calls all the time where they have a startup company that they're trying to do business with X customer, and X customer says, well, before we do any business, you need to have A, B, and C security controls in place. So in a lot of ways, their hands are being forced to do it. It's sort of the cost of doing business these days.
Okay. What do you see as the common, misconceptions with business surrounding cybersecurity and their practices?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest misconception at the end of the day is most, and for those cybersecurity professionals out there, I assume they've heard this once or twice, is really that cybersecurity, it is a cost center. It's kind of like insurance. It's sometimes hard to prove and validate that you needed it. But more importantly, from a business perspective, I think oftentimes the business side of the house sees cybersecurity side of the house. We have historically had the reputation of being the no police, right?
Yeah.
You're like, hey,
Dr.
I want to do this thing. No, you can't do it. It's too risky. No, that's going to really do this. And I know the industry has tried really hard to shift that mentality from, hey, we're not saying no. If you think about the brakes on a car, do they stop the car? Yes, they do. But what they really allow, though, is the car to go really fast.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So brakes allow the car to go fast
It's kind of the
so
insurance
that,
policy, right?
yeah, it allows the car to go fast so that you can hit the brakes and controlled, right? I can go fast, but I can do it in a safe and controlled manner. And that really is, I think, probably the biggest misconception is I think when people, if you're out there from a normal user perspective, you get stuff all the time, right? Like, oh, I have to change my password, or your company sends you a phishing email and you click on it. And it was like, boo, you shouldn't have clicked on it,
Yeah.
right? Or, just these, you can't go to a particular website, right? All these controls that I think people just continue to bump into controls and they just feel like it's like this fence that's up around them. And again, the real sort of underlying principle there is, hey, these things are in place because we want to allow the business to move fast, but do it in a controlled and safe manner.
That makes sense. You've mentioned, phishing a couple times, and I think most people are familiar with it, but people that aren't, it's, someone sending a, fraudulent email or text, or maybe even a phone call sometimes, and
Right.
responding and trying to get information outside of what you were saying, where, because we have that same kind of corporate policy
Right.
where every once in a while we'll get something and you're like, I know better not to click on that. And then if you do, you have to go through the education process again.
Right.
and everybody knows, but I mean, there's some effective strategies and policies to reduce phishing in companies.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head in the terms of it happens all the time. They send out tons and tons and tons of emails like this that they're malicious. They will, send you to a web, click here. We see them, to put it in consumer terms, you get an email from Netflix that it looks like Netflix. It has the next Netflix logo. It says, hey, your credit card expired. You're about to lose your account. And people panic because now there's this sense of urgency, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have to go take some action.
Right.
You click on a link that just says, click here to update your payment information. It takes you to a page that looks exactly like Netflix, and next thing you know, you put in your credit card, you put in your username and your password. And at that point, guess what? Right? Like that's exactly what they wanted. Now they've taken your credentials, they've taken your payment information, and they're able to do other nefarious things with it. What we can do to prevent that, number one, is recognize the behavior, right? Recognize that typically if I get something that, hey, you missed this UPS delivery, click here. I got a text message today.
No, they've been
Right?
nonstop.
Right. With the holidays,
Yes.
you're 100% right.
It's
Right.
stuck in the warehouse.
That's right. Yeah. Click here to
By the way,
reschedule.
they're not even good because they're coming in from international
Right.
numbers, and you're
Yeah.
like, okay.
Yeah, mine was from a +66, I think. Yeah, you're exactly right. So I think, in that sense, I think there is a sense of take a second. Like the thing that we say the most, I think, is around trust but verify.
Mhm.
Okay, I got that email from Netflix. That didn't look right. there's some technical things that you could do that we won't talk about here around making sure that the sender really is the sender. Sometimes they mess with the domain, and instead of Netflix, maybe, it's NETF, but instead of an L, it's a 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you just look at it really fast, it looks like Netflix, but it's not really it. So there's some things that you can do like that. But ultimately, it's sort of trust but verify. If I get an email from Netflix that says, click here to change your password, whatever, I'm not going to do anything in that email at that point. I'm going to go directly to the site. So I would encourage people, if it's from your bank, right, go right to, your bank. That's right.
Go to your
just go to the
website.
go to the source, right? Log in directly from your bank's website, or again, we'll keep hammering on Netflix, but go right to Netflix's site or whatever, right? Just go directly to those places, and I try and avoid clicking things in email as much as I can.
Yeah, some of the sophistication is amazing though. Like email, I guess Takeover.
Mm-hmm.
We had, I mean, this is a couple of years ago now, but I got an email from our CEO that's like, "Hey, you need to wire," and I'm like, "Okay, I work at a bank. This is silly. Like,
right?
CEO's not going to ask me to wire money anywhere."
Yeah.
But when you looked, I mean, it was his email address.
Right.
When you hovered over it, it was our email address. But when you hit reply, it changed.
Went somewhere else.
Yeah.
And the thing at the end of the day, they wouldn't do it if it didn't work. So for you see something like that, and your first response is, that's silly. Like, how could people fall for this? And they do, like organizations all the time where, and I don't know the number of how many of these we get, but fraud is a regular activity where someone sends an email in, a fraudulent email that says, "Hey, we're doing this. It's a merger and acquisition. We can't talk about it. Don't tell anyone. This is completely off the books until this deal. We can't go public with it, but I need you to wire this amount of money to this account, and it has to be done by 5 o'clock if we're going to get this deal done." So again, you see this sense of urgency, this secretiveness, that's built in. And again, I think the encouragement for anybody in that space would be really make sure that you have good processes.
Yeah, pick up the phone.
Right. Yeah, have some good, if you get any request ever for a wire transfer that's more than $20,000, here's the steps that you should follow. But again, like, I think people at the end of the day, the problem is, it's not a problem, but the challenge is that at the end of the day, people really are good-natured. And most of humanity is, right?
So we're all trusting.
You're right. Yeah, I think most of humanity wants to believe the best about other people, which is great. Now, unfortunately, there's those in society who take advantage of that and cause issues like this.
So, not to scare our listeners, especially those that are, I guess most everybody listening is a bank account. But so when we get a wire request, I mean, we hang up the phone. We call the number on record to verify. And so it is a process. But I had learned recently a national bank actually does video. But of course, in today's day and age, apparently this particular scenario, there was, I guess, through maybe social media, they were able to do a fake. So when the bank actually did the video back, they thought it was a match, but it was a deep fake. Yeah.
Deep fake. Wow. And we haven't even touched on that yet, but with the rise of AI and everything that's happening in AI, it's going to do a lot of wonderful things for organizations across the board. Like a lot of great, just everything from taking mundane tasks and taking those out of the hands of people and freeing up, frankly, those people to do, just better things with their time, right? But the bad guys using AI just the same. And so when you think about like these phishing emails that we talked about earlier, if you think about how AI works, it's able to go out. It can find your profile out on LinkedIn. It can source information about who you are, right? Your marital status, your family status, where you live, where you went to college, like all these things, and then compile all of that and create a phishing email now that isn't just, hey, I'm a prince in Nigeria, the Nigerian scam, right? I need help. Now it's, hey, I'm your college alma mater, or I'm part of this club that you're a part of, right? And we have the same social interest. And so, all of a sudden, I think that's going to be a real challenge for people moving into 25 this year and certainly next. But between AI and like deep fakes, for instance, it's just really, it's going to be hard to detect. I mean, it's getting so much better. Like if you looked at what some of the deep fakes look like, let's say even just a year ago to where they are now, I mean, it's it's amazing. There's a meme on the internet where basically it shows a guy's face and it says something to the effect of, I'm so over seeing all the deep fakes on the internet. And then it shows like a surprise face, and it's like a second one where it says, hey, I don't see deep fakes on the internet anymore.
Yeah.
But it's because they've gotten so good, you just
good.
Can't see them. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you've seen, I think it's deep fake Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
You seen that one?
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
Hey, he's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's scary.
It's unbelievable.
Well, I know AI is being used to also as an identification measure.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, can you talk a little bit about that? Is it a useful tool? Do you see that growing as well to counteract, the threat and attack side of things?
Yeah, maybe you could explain a little bit more from an identification perspective. But I think where we see AI really being for good, right, is it allows. If you think about, you mentioned we talked about Verizon earlier, and we talked about just how much data they have. But think about all the security solutions that they have in their environment and how much data is just pouring in from those systems, right? Trying to identify attacks, trying to identify anomalies, strange behavior. And now, right, AI has the capability to really do the job of several people, many people at once, right, to help analyze all of that data that's coming in, identify those trends, find that information, the really important stuff that you want. Because if you think about a system might generate millions and millions of logs, right? That's almost nearly impossible for one person or a team of people to just scroll through a screen, right? You can't really do that. And there's always been, there's already technology that helps sort of go through that, but now AI is just taking it to a whole nother level. And it really is a tool that's going to help out anything, like a lot of things that are operationally driven, like just repeat operational behavior that it can learn and it can be taught. That kind of stuff, especially in the cybersecurity space, is going to really help teams, frankly, be able to scale. We talked earlier about like small to medium-sized businesses where they don't have necessarily the budget or the resources. Well, now if I can augment my staff, I don't have to continue to hire people, right? I can invest in a technology, an AI technology that can do some of that work for me. It's just going to make everybody's lives better and safer.
Sure. I mean, we use it for fraud detection on checks.
Right.
It's one of the tools. And I know just for outside threats of people trying to hack into our system, we have some AI tools that identify that.
Yeah, sorry. And I get it. I'm sorry. That's where you were going earlier with the identifying the bad behavior. Yeah, and it's exactly, again, from our perspective, we look at that through like a security operations center. But absolutely, right. If it can know what a known good is. There's a blog out there that if you're interested, one of the there's a gentleman who's really posting a lot and doing a lot around AI specifically. His name's Daniel Meisler, if I'm saying it correctly, his last name. I think that's right. And one of the things that he talks is a wonderful article. If you really want to know about like, hey, how is AI really going to change things? He does a great job of bulleting out a couple of different job functions where it's like, hey, if you take like in the healthcare industry, here's what has to happen. But one, it's a little sillier, but it's the ability to think of a fictitious website, and their job is to identify cute dogs. That's all they post is cute dogs, right? Well, if you think about the steps to do that, somebody submits a picture, somebody has to look at it and say, hey, is this a dog? Might be a cat, might be a fish. So the first thing, is it a dog? Well, computers can do that today, right? That's, I don't want to say a black and white thing, but it kind of is, right? It's either a dog or it's not, right? I'm sure there's probably some confusion in there, but then ultimately when you get to this other more judgmental part of, is it a cute dog? Well, that's human, right? There's some perception in that you can't really code that per se, right? You can't write a program that says a cute dog, you can't do that. And so from an AI perspective, though, it has that sort of judgment capability to look at something and say, yeah, this is a cute dog. Well, I don't know how we got off on this. I don't know how we got,
I like dogs.
I don't know how we got on this rabbit trail, but it really does simplify, sort of, it's going to help really from an overall job perspective of helping people focus on more higher level tasks. Right. So, and it can do, and it can do a lot of that identification that is just very time consuming and where we are just limited to do today. We just don't have enough, companies don't have enough headcount or enough resources to really do it. like the fraud thing that you're talking about, right? I mean, that's a wonderful savings where AI can step in, look for things, identify patterns or behaviors or whatever, flag it if it's bad, pass it on if it's good. I just think, again, get on the bandwagon if you're not already on it. I mean, I think AI is here to stay, and I think especially from a cybersecurity lens and how it can really help companies, I think it's going to be fantastic.
So what would you recommend in terms of just a basic framework for a company to institute for security?
Yeah. So I will say, I mean, we can talk at a high level. I mean, I think specifically, like if the audience was out there listening and either they're not familiar with it or whatever, I think there are some standards that you could go look at. One is, for instance, there's NIST Cybersecurity Framework, by the way, which is just a sort of a comprehensive look in an easily digestible way, where it breaks it down by categories like identify and respond and that sort of thing. And I think categorically you can look at it that way. I think there's another one, the CIS. It's now owned by SANS, I think, but the CIS top 20 controls, where it just breaks down what those controls are. But ultimately, though, if you were to sort of summarize what all those think about in terms of, hey, what's the basics? One, you have to start with asset management, software management. Like, what do I have? If I don't know what I have, if I don't know how many computers I have in my environment, if I don't know that, if I don't know about them, I can't protect them.
Right. Yeah.
And so it always starts with some sort of better understanding of what my environment looks like, what's involved there. I think the second thing really ties into, okay, we have these devices. So how am I protecting them? Usernames, passwords, patching, right? Keep them up to date, those sort of things. But really, I think the focus that you hear a lot about today in today's world with cloud computing and a lot of things, it's much more of a data-centric focus. And so where is my data? Where's it going? Who has access to it, right? How am I protecting it? If I give it to you, what are you doing with it? Are you giving it to someone else, right? At what point am I losing control over it, right? If I have it, I know I can protect it. If I give it to you, you're one remove, we can shake hands and sign some contracts and I can make sure that you're protecting it the right way. The farther it sort of goes down that line, I think that's where there's some real struggles. And I think, we talked earlier about the Verizon data breach where you lose social security numbers and, people's personal information. Well, how does that happen? Sometimes it is directly through, that company. Other times, though, it was Verizon data, but they had given it to a third party.
Right.
And the breach actually happened through the third party. So it wasn't, technically Verizon's fault, right? In that, if that were the case there.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, having that data-centric view of, again, where is my data? Who has it? Who has access to it? Where is it going? How do I make sure my crown jewels are protected?
Right.
I think that's really the heart of it.
So how do you manage the balance between cybersecurity tools and personnel, like human capital?
Yeah. So, man, I just had this conversation earlier today about trying to, marry those two together. And I think in some sense, it is an interesting balance. We talk about organizations having like a tool to engineer ratio, because that's, unfortunately, there's a lot of security standards or requirements that you have to follow probably in the banking industry. You have tons, right? Yep. That say you have to do A, B, and C. Well, sometimes organizations, they'll buy a product that does whatever function. They sort of plug it in. They get a nice little checkbox, but it isn't really right. It isn't really providing the security value that you think it does.
Right.
Well, you have to have people typically, right, to sort of help drive that out. And unfortunately, the average organization right now has somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 security solutions. So think about that. An average company has about 50. Some have a lot more than that, right? Some have less, but some have more. So you think, okay, if I have 50 security solutions, how am I going to really effectively manage all those? And so we do see a trend in the marketplace of consolidation, right? We see some of the bigger platforms trying to, kind of create and become, more of a super platform, right? Sort of one thing. I can be one thing to all people. Mm-hmm. There's some trade-offs with that. There's some benefits to that in terms of how do I balance that tool and people resource thing. That's one way to do it, right? If I only have sort of one platform that I have to go into and really understand, instead of having to know or manage 10 different ones, that could be helpful, right? So that's one strategy we see others doing. The other strategy, frankly, is outsourcing. Again, I know that costs money as well, but you don't have to hire those resources for that. And sometimes it is more cost effective and cheaper to hand that off to someone else. Yeah, to have someone else do that. So that's certainly a strategy there. But there is no silver bullet, one answer that just, hey, this is how you handle it. Because based on the organization, the type of industry that you're in, the market that you're in, sort of the architecture of your company, like what tools, like for instance, if you're an e-commerce shop, that's a whole lot of different exposure, right? Of, you're selling goods on the internet.
Yeah, the exchange of information back and forth.
Right.
So,
credit card payments, those sort of things. That's completely different than, I don't know, a company that barely has a web presence because, they're I don't want to say any particular industry that they just are more local, right? Maybe a little more brick and mortar. Or maybe it's an accounting firm that doesn't really, they keep everything local, like whatever those things are. It's just a different risk profile and it requires different tools. And but at the end of the day, it's a really hard question that if you had the answer to that,
that's what I specialize in.
That's right.
Hard questions. I want to get to Guidepoint in a minute here, but
sure.
No, I think your background at Disney is really interesting, and all that you touched there. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, man, so much fun. I really had a lot of fun there. One of the things that was so when you go, you have to go through like this Disney traditions where they sort of, jokingly, inject you with all the pixie dust. They sprinkle the pixie dust on you, but all the things they do are true. I mean, it's not. They talk about memories that you have there, and most people have strong memories in and around Disney, and you do sort of get that air of magic, right? Like, hey, we're helping families make magic. We're helping, and for me, I worked at Disney, and I worked within the Parks and Resorts business segment, and the really at first, my first role there was really tied to, just protecting the infrastructure, specifically around like credit card payments, making sure people's payments were safe. And, you imagine being on vacation and your credit card gets compromised or even after the fact, you come home from a vacation and then you find out, there's just that sort of diminishes the magic a little bit.
So, gone, right?
So we took that pretty seriously. And I think in terms of the guest experience though, I mean, being so close to that, and knowing that you play a part in that was pretty phenomenal.
Rewarding.
Yeah. The second part, sort of the second role I had there for a bit was much more hands-on, sort of in that guest experience swim lane. And so that was a lot of fun as you're thinking about everything from, scanning faces to put on a doll, or a figurine. Like, how do you secure that, right? Like, no one's doing that, and so you think about Disney being the thought leader in a lot of experiences like that. Mm-hmm. And then, our job and certainly others, right, to think about, okay, well, how do we really secure that? Like, how do we do that? And so I think that was just
the wristbands that are coded with all the information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Magic Band, that was a project that I worked on while I was there, where you're trying to figure out, okay, how do we keep this thing secure so that you can't just steal it, or if you they have RFID in them, right? And so how do we make sure people can't abuse that? And so now you're thinking about sort of outside the box things like, hey, how would people abuse these? Like, how would we talked earlier about being, everybody has a good conscience and sort of at their heart, are trying to do the right things. Well, you have to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and say, hey, how could I abuse that? Well, maybe if I could tap into that RFID, I could follow you around, or I could know where you went. So, there's all these.
You walk right up to somebody. And
yeah. How do you prevent that
from
from
credit cards?
Right. How do you prevent that from happening? Right. And so I think for me, certainly the being sort of frontline on the guest experience and knowing that you really are, I think the slogan there was securing the magic. I think that you really are having a part in that. There's something that's special and unique about that.
I can imagine that.
Yeah. And just tons of fun. And then again, I think just because of the nature of the business being so cutting edge and always wanting to try something new, that even that was sort of, keeping you on your toes a bit. And again, it wasn't ever just a rinse and repeat. Oh yeah, we're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. No, like it was real opportunity to explore and think, and well, how would we secure that? And what is the real issue, and what are those risks, and how could those be abused?
Sure.
And yeah, tons of fun though. Tons of fun. I know we'll talk about Guidepoint in a minute, but if Guidepoint hadn't come along, I would most likely still be there.
Still be there.
Yeah,
Still part of the magic.
Really enjoyed it. Yeah, it's still in the blood.
I love that. Maybe one last question, one last fastball before we get into the Guidepoint.
Please.
But quantum computing.
Yeah.
So what Google's been able to accomplish, theoretically, is amazing and also terrifying. And
Right.
combine that with
Right.
AI. So how do we prepare for a world that quantum computing exists?
Yeah. So quantum computing is just such a huge topic, and it's still sort of out there enough where I think people are still trying to wrap their head around it and figure out, okay, what does this really mean for me? And for most, they don't know. And if you think about,
I'm one of those, I have no idea. So
right.
me.
But if you look at, like you mentioned, Google, right? You think very large organizations have the capability and frankly the funds to invest in and help build out, really a computing infrastructure that we've never seen before.
Yeah.
And so if you think about the speed to do calculations, the speed to figure things out, and I don't have examples, but things that would take hundreds of years now will take seconds, right?
Yes,
You think about that, like the potential for that is mind-boggling, both in terms of positive and negative.
Mm-hmm.
The way it shows up for us, the big topic in the cybersecurity space is really around its impact on encryption. And so if you think about how much, all of our data is encrypted, you probably hear that a lot, right? We encrypt our transmissions. We encrypt the data where it's stored. We encrypt your passwords so people can't just go find those. And the real, I don't want to say fear, because I don't think it's a fear, but the real, sort of practicality of where it's going is they're going at some point, right? Quantum computing, they call it Q Day, is when quantum computing gets the ability to break encryption standards that exist today. And when that happens, I think we'll get out ahead of it enough. Like they'll come out with something new, I'm sure, in terms of encryption standards and how to make it sort of quantum proof. But in terms of the method of how it's done today, it's going to go away. And that's going to be a significant shift, because so much is rooted on encryption keys. And again, we don't need to talk technical here, but those keys really, it's like the key to your house, but a million times more complicated, right? Of how those keys work. And the fact that those have the potential to be broken is mind-blowing from a security industry perspective. Is that going to happen in 25? I don't think so, right? But it's coming. It's materializing. You see, the hardware capabilities are becoming better and better. The software that's associated with them, and you see other partners coming together and collaborating more to really make advances there. It's got some crazy potential for good and for bad, I would say.
Well, that's kind of the interesting thing with Google too, because now many companies have the resources to do that. And I know they're looking at potentially breaking it apart
Right.
from a competitive standpoint. But yet, if you do that, you don't have a
Yeah.
Google that can create
Right.
some
Right.
amazing, terrifying, but maybe some amazing. What about things like VPN and endpoint? Are those? Do you recommend those?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would tell you, as I think about protections like VPN, even just using some type of multi-factor authentication is another big thing there. I always think about, it used to be that whatever you did sort of in the professional world in your corporate job sort of stayed, and you didn't need it maybe as much on the home front as you do. But if you think about how much of your life now is tied up in, your banking's online, your social media is online.
Everything's in the cloud.
Yeah. And so you really have to think really carefully about, hey, how do I really protect those things? And so using things like VPN that can help sort of obfuscate your traffic, your internet traffic. So if you're in a public place and somebody can't just sniff your data that's flying across the invisible Wi-Fi out there, right? That's a challenge if you don't have VPN. Using multi-factor authentication. My neighbor a couple years ago, she was running her business off of Facebook, and her Facebook account got hacked, which okay, that happens, not the end of the world, except for the fact that
It's her business.
it was her business.
Yeah.
And so now she couldn't access her customers. She couldn't communicate to them. Now, one, they're telling you, hey, if you want your account back, you have to pay me X amount of money. But the other part too is they could start saying, whatever to their customer base, right?
Yeah.
And so now that creates, that's a real issue, right? That I don't think people historically have thought about, again, Instagram or Facebook or X, Twitter, hey, how do I really protect that? So I would just highly encourage anywhere that you can use multi-factor authentication, you absolutely should be doing that.
Okay.
But yeah, VPNs, I think for some traffic, I think it's important. If you're in some random hotel, it's probably better to stay a little more protected. Obviously, if you're on your home network, it's not really necessary. If you're, again, there's been most organizations today, like if you go to a restaurant that has Wi-Fi, if it's an established restaurant, most of the time they've taken the right precautions. But I don't know. I'm paid to be a little skeptical, so I typically just run it all the time.
So I'm taking your advice.
Just to protect myself.
All right, so talk to us about Guidepoint.
Sure. At our heart, Guidepoint really is, and our goal is to be your trusted security advisor. We want to come alongside, build a relationship, understand what you're doing, what your goals are, what your business outcomes want to be, and make sure that you have the right solutions, technology solutions to do that, to lower the risk, right, to whatever those outcomes might be. And we also have the professional services arm that can come in and help do that from, incident response or penetration testing, application testing, really the full suite of security solutions or security activities. We have sort of the talent and knowledge to come in and do that. So again, though, we really just want to be your one-stop shop for all things, be your trusted security partner.
And does size of the company matter?
No. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, we work with the top Fortune companies and the bottom ones, right? We really run the gamut from really large enterprises to small to medium businesses as well.
All right. So I would ask you, however, just go to guidepoint.com.
Yeah, and you can also, Gary at gpsec.com is my email address. If you ever have questions, feel free to email me.
Awesome, Gary. Well, thank you for coming on Money Market.
Yeah, thanks, Owen.
If you have a question or future show idea or would like to be a sponsor, you can send us a message at moneymarket@bankoftampa.com or find us on LinkedIn, X, Facebook, and on Instagram at Bank of Tampa and online at bankoftampa.com. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you around in the Money Market.